Goat versus fish. In the beginning, there was goat versus fish, the goatfish. And goat versus fish said that there should be goat and that there should be fish. There is no alpha or omega. There is no black or white. There is no good or evil. There is only goat and fish and goat versus fish. Welcome to the Goat vs. Fish podcast, recorded at the world-famous Comedy Store, Los Angeles, a place of goat versus fish. Goat versus Fish speaks to you now, speaks directly to you. You are one with Goat versus Fish, forever Goat versus Fish, and Goat versus Fish is one with you. You have many questions, yes? Who is Goat versus Fish? What is goat versus fish? Why is goat versus fish? But there is only one question. Are you goat or are you fish? Ponder it now. This is Goat versus Fish. Mighty versus. It has been a long versus, with many verses within, many verses of all kinds between goat and fish. On this, the mighty versus, it is the mighty versus, goat versus fish, the goatfish, calls on all goat and fish to verse mightily, more mightily than you have ever versed before. And let us have many verses within the mighty verses, as many verses as you can verse. What a celebration. The mighty verses comes only once every verses, so it is time to go full verses, goat and fish. Full verses. Are you prepared? Are you prepared for the mighty verses? Do not say you did not know it was coming. Do not say you did not know it was coming, for there is a mighty verses every verses. It is the end of one verses, it is the beginning of another verses, and between those verses, ending one verses, starting another, the mighty verses. Surely there is a versesly bit of goat or fish you have been saving within your goat or fish, waiting to come out during the mighty verses, yes? Well, now is the verses. This is not a verses for sitting on the fence, not a verses for sitting on the fence. If you are a goat, find a fish. If you are a fish, find a goat. Find another one and be goat versus fish. Goat versus fish. And on the mighty verses we also ponder the verses that have passed, and the verses yet to come in the next verses. Verses triumphed, verses not triumphed. The verses within, the verses without. For many of you ones, it was during this very verses that you did first hear the word of goat versus fish. Do you remember the first time you heard the word of goat versus fish? You chose goat or fish, unlike the fence sitter. And what a verses it was. What a verses it was, and what a verses worth celebrating. Verses! Now is also the verses to spread the word of all the verses you have versed, building up to this, the mighty verses. Share them on the Twitterver, the Book of Faces, the Instantgram, so the verses are there for all to witness and ponder. Share them so that they can be counted, so that we can see who triumphed more this verses, the goat or the fish. And what of the fence-sitter? What of the fence-sitter? The mighty verses, many ones say, is the most goat versus fish of all the verses. So it is quite the verses for a fence-sitter to Look at the land, look at the sea, look at the goat frolic, look at the fish swim, and look at the goat versus the fish, and get off the fence and choose goat or fish. Are you going to sit on the fence, almighty verses? Do you simply wish to watch the mighty verses from afar? So pitiable, so pitiable. Goat. Goat! Goat to all the goat and to the verses in which goat did triumph. Fish. Fish. Fish to all the fish and to all the verses in which fish did triumph. Who shall triumph in the mighty verses? It is up to the goat and the fish. It is up to you, goat or fish. So a mighty verses to all goat and fish. Verses. It is also the 7th verses of GoatVsFish. Pleasant goatfish, pleasant goatfish. And on the 7th verse of GoatVsFish, the goatfish gave to me 7 goat and fish, 6 goat and fish, goat versus fish. 4 goat and fish, 3 goat fish, 2 goat and fish, and a goat versus a fish. Yes, it is the 7th verses of the GoatVsFish. And on the verses of the GoatVsFish, we do celebrate the unity of a goat and fish. You can learn more about GoatVsFish in the previous verses of the GoatVsFish podcast, where there was much celebration of the unity of goat and fish. And now, we do sing. Sing! Sing in celebration of the mighty verses. Should all the verses be forgot, and from them draw might, for all things are goat versus fish, and never black or white. Should all the verses be forgot, and from them draw might, for all things are goat versus fish, and never black nor white. Mighty verses, everyone, mighty verses, everyone. Thank you for joining Goat versus Fish. This is the word of Goat versus Fish. The theme music for this verses was an offering by McHenry on SoundCloud. And if you, one who listens, has a celebration of Goat versus Fish, in song or poem or any other celebration, do send it to GoatVsFish@gmail.com. That's GoatVsFish. Send your celebrations, and send your questions, and send the writings of the most mighty verses you did ever verses, so that Goat versus Fish could share your verses with all of the goat and fish. Subscribe, rate, and review the Goat versus Fish podcast on the YouTube and the iTunes. Follow Goat versus Fish on all social media. The Instagram, the Book of Faces, the Twitterver, all at Goat versus Fish, all at GoatVsFish. And when you are out in the land and the sea, look about you. Look about you. Find one who is lost. Find one who does not know the way. And ask. Simply ask. Are you goat? Or are you fish? Because I would like to versus you. I would like to versus you, you say to the goat or the fish. Thank you for joining Goat versus Fish. I am Goat versus Fish, the GoatVsFish. But wait, the one cries out. How can I celebrate the mighty verses of Goat versus Fish while at the same time celebrating the unity that is the verses of the GoatVsFish? To that, Goat versus Fish, the GoatVsFish says, we wish you a pleasant GoatVsFish and a mighty verses. And it was written. And it was written.